In August of 2014, a Seattle couple, Mark and Anna Rangel, went hiking in the mountainous Lake Ingalls in Washington state. They left their SUV at the trailhead and disappeared without a trace. Only the prints of 2 pairs of boots led deep into the mountains and broke off among the stone slope. 8 years have passed. In the fall of 2022, construction workers repairing a bridge pillar over the Snoqualmie River accidentally stumbled upon a cavity inside the concrete. Inside were 2 skeletons, embracing each other as if to say goodbye. Mark and Anna Rangel from Seattle seem to be an example of a couple with everything in harmony. He is a 28-year-old civil engineer, attentive to detail and calm in everything. She was a 26-year-old primary school teacher, cheerful and compassionate. Their life was simple and orderly: work, a house with a white porch, summer hikes, and a habit of meeting sunrises in the mountains. To their friends, they were people who knew how to enjoy the little things: silence, coffee on the grass, the smell of rain. August 2014 was another opportunity for them to escape the city. They decided to spend the weekend in Mount Baker Snoqualmie National Park hiking the Lake Ingalls Trail, which led to one of Washington's most beautiful mountain lakes. It was a familiar format for them: 2 days of hiking, a night in a tent, and a Sunday return home. Mark checked maps and weather forecasts, checked the altitude, and packed his gear. Anna packed her backpack and put things together: a first aid kit, a thermos, dried fruit, and her favorite purple sweater. They were experienced hikers and knew how to act in the mountains. According to the plan, they were to leave on Friday morning, reach the lake by evening, and return on Sunday. On August 22nd, around 7 in the morning, a neighbor saw Mark loading the backpacks into a black Toyota 4Runner. Anna smiled, adjusted her hat, and waved to her. At 9:40, they stopped at a gas station in the town of Roslyn. A surveillance camera captured them at the coffee machine. Calm, relaxed, like hundreds of other tourists heading to the mountains. The cashier would later tell investigators, "They looked happy. The girl had a bright sweater. It's hard to forget." At 10:30, their car was recorded by a camera at the entrance to the park. Then everything disappeared into the mountains. The only thing left was a photo sent to the family at 16:05. Smiling faces, sun, peaks behind them, and the caption, "Better than any dream. We are coming back on Sunday night." This was the last message. The Lake Ingalls Trail stretches over the Tehias River and leads to a plateau with a panorama of snow-capped Mount Stewart. It is not considered dangerous, but it requires endurance. Sections with gravel, narrow ridges, places where the connection disappears. The weather that day was perfect: about 70 degrees Fahrenheit, light winds, clear skies. At 17:30, Mark sent a short message to his colleague. "We've reached the top. The signal is weak, but everything is fine." After that, their phones went silent. Presumably, they had pitched their tent near the upper lake, a popular place to spend the night. The next morning, a group of hikers walking along the same trail noticed 2 clear footprints leading north toward a rocky ridge. Then the prints broke off on the rocks. After that, there was silence. No belongings, no signs of a struggle, not even a cigarette butt or a scrap of cloth. The tent they took with them was never found. In the notebook left in the car, the last line was short: "Return Sunday, August 24th. But they did not show up on Sunday. That evening, the sun was setting behind the peaks, and only a black Toyota 4Runner stood alone at the trailhead. At the time, no one guessed that this would be Mark and Anna's last hike, and that their love story, full of light, would end in the cold concrete silence of the bridge he had once built himself. On Monday, August 25, 2014, the Office of Northwest Infrastructure noticed that Mark had not shown up for the morning meeting. He was never late, let alone disappear without warning. His colleagues called, but his cell phone was off the grid. That same morning, the school where Anna taught also became alert. The classroom was empty, There were unopened textbooks on the table, and the principal could not reach her by phone. By the evening, her relatives filed a missing persons report. Quititas County Police immediately began checking the route the couple had planned. At 10 o'clock in the evening, rangers from Mount Baker Snoqualmie National Park joined the investigation. They confirmed that there had been no storms, rock slides, or other natural events in the Lake Ingalls area last week that could explain the disappearance. The next morning, a search and rescue team worked at the site. A helicopter with a thermal imager flew over the mountain range, and patrols with dogs were on the ground. The area was difficult: steep slopes, dense thickets, crevices where even the signal of radio stations was lost. The search started from the top of the route and gradually went down, combing every yard of the territory. The first 2 days yielded only a lot of false trails, old campfires, fragments of equipment from other tourists. Each find caused a flash of hope, but the experts quickly extinguished it. The dogs picked up the scent several times, but each time they lost it in rocky areas. One ranger later confessed, "It seemed like the ground itself was hiding their tracks." The family arrived at the park on Wednesday. Anna's father stood outside the command tent, spreading out a map on the hood of the car, and her mother sat next to him, holding the thermos her daughter always took on hikes. They waited for any news, but every night the rangers just shook their heads. By the end of the week, the operation turned into a full-scale one. More than 50 people worked, including volunteers, climbers, and search dogs from other districts. A helicopter surveyed more than 10 square miles using thermal imaging cameras at night. But there were no results. On August 29th, Detective Michael Gray of the Sheriff's Office officially took charge of the case. He told the press that he was looking at 3 possibilities: an accident, a wild animal attack, or a human-involved crime. "So far, we have no evidence of any of them," he told journalists gathered outside the headquarters. By this time, the story had already hit the news. Local TV channels were showing helicopter footage of endless pine slopes and narrow paths lost in fog. The headlines read, "Seattle couple missing in Washington mountains." The flow of volunteers grew every day. People brought warm clothes, flashlights, and food for the searchers. But none of the dozens of routes gave a hint as to where Mark and Anna might have gone. On the 8th day of the disappearance, the detective invited a private pilot from Cascade Air, a company that had access to small, low-flying aircraft, to cooperate. The pilot made 3 overflights of the route area. In one of the canyons, they noticed light spots that looked like tents, but when they got there on foot, they found only the empty wreckage of an old tourist campsite. As 2 weeks passed, resources were depleted. The official headquarters announced the transition to a passive phase. This meant that they would continue to search only if new information was received. The family did not accept this decision. Mark's father told reporters, "He knew these mountains. If an accident had happened, we would have found at least something." In early September, the parking lot near Lake Ingalls was empty. Only a sign that read "Evidence Area" swayed in the wind next to a black Toyota 4Runner. Everything inside was as it had been: neatly folded clothes, a thermos in a holder, and a phone in the glove compartment that no one had tried to turn on. Officially, the search lasted 48 hours longer than planned. Then the disappearance of Mark and Anna Rangel was classified as a cold case. The report stated, "No signs of life were found. The cause of disappearance is unknown." But for those who saw their smile in the last photo, this reason was yet to be found. Months passed, then years. The case of the Rangers was transferred from department to department, and eventually it turned into another unresolved case in a thick folder labeled "Cold Case." The police officers who had initially reported to the family daily now answered briefly, "No news." In the fall of 2015, investigators officially stopped active searches. For the state, Mark and Anna became just 2 missing tourists. For their families, it was a void that had no boundaries. Anna's parents moved from Seattle to the neighboring town of North Bend to be closer to the mountains. Every weekend they hiked the same trails, hoping to find something: a piece of cloth, a piece of jewelry, a bone. Every year this hope faded, but they did not stop. On each anniversary of her disappearance, they held a small vigil near the Lake Ingalls parking lot, leaving purple flowers, the color of Anna's sweater. 2 years after the tragedy, the family hired a private investigator from Seattle, a former agent named David Richardson. He had a reputation as a stubborn professional who did not believe in accidental disappearances. After reviewing the case file, Richardson noticed one fact that the police did not consider important at the time. A few months before the hike, Mark had worked as a technical supervision inspector on a major construction project, a bridge over the Snokely River on a state highway near the town of Fall City. The project, worth over $20 million, was being completed in 2013. Mark was responsible for quality control of materials. According to his colleagues, he had an impeccable reputation and was not afraid to argue with management. It was then that he had a conflict with the contractor, Morrison Construct, headed by Jack Morrison. The issue was the use of a lower grade of concrete, which could have led to the destruction of the pillars. Mark insisted on repeating the tests, and Morrison threatened to sue for defamation of character. In the official correspondence, which the detective later studied, there was a letter from Mark to his superiors. "We are risking people's lives if we sign this acceptance certificate. I will not agree to put my signature on a falsification." In February of 2014, he officially reported the violation to the State Department of Transportation. They began to investigate the case, but a month later, the inspection was unexpectedly closed. Mark kept silent, but according to his sister, he became more withdrawn after that incident. When she asked him if he was okay, he gave a short answer: "I went too far. Some people didn't like it." Detective Richardson contacted former employees of Morrison Construct. 2 agreed to speak off the record. One of them, a contract engineer, said that during the construction, night concreting was often carried out without supervision by inspectors. Mark was in the way. He became unwelcome, the source said. Richardson passed on his findings to the King County Police, but they responded in the standard way. There was no evidence of Morrison's involvement in the disappearance. The contractor was summoned for a brief interrogation. He appeared with a lawyer, said that he had last seen Mark 6 months before he disappeared, and provided an alibi. That August weekend he was in California at a construction technology trade show. Investigators checked the tickets, the hotel, and the witnesses. That was the end of the story. The relatives, disappointed with the police's inaction, filed a claim for insurance payments. The procedure lasted almost 2 years. In 2016, they were officially recognized as missing. The money, less than $100,000, was used to pay for private searches, legal expenses, and to create a small fund to help other families of the missing. Meanwhile, publications, videos, and forums began to appear online. Some people assumed that the couple had fallen victim to a hermit hunter living in the mountains. Others wrote about sex practicing sacrifices to nature. There were also those who believed that Mark and Anna had simply escaped by faking their deaths, a version that the family perceived as an insult. The private detective did not give up the case. He checked old photos of the bridge, analyzed the technical drawings, and noticed one strange fact. The final acceptance certificate, dated December 2013, indicated additional concreting of pillars number 3 and number 4 without explanation. These pillars were located closer to the river, where a new stage of history would begin 8 years later. At that time, no one suspected that the truth Mark was looking for was indeed inside the concrete, and that the Snoqualmie River, so calm on the surface, hid 2 fates cemented together forever beneath its piers. In the fall of 2022, exactly 8 years after the disappearance of Mark and Anna Rangel, the state of Washington began scheduled repairs to the Snoqualmie River Bridge. After a harsh winter, Department of Transportation engineers noticed cracks in the lining of the piers, and it was decided to carry out preventive strengthening of the structures. The work started in September, when the water level in the river dropped and the equipment could safely reach the lower parts of the bridge. For the workers, it was a routine procedure: remove the outer layer of concrete, replace the reinforcement, and check the internal cavities. But what they found was the beginning of one of the most gruesome investigations in the state's recent history. On October 27th, at about 11 in the morning, a 5-man crew was dismantling the lining of the central pillar number 3. A machine with a hydraulic hammer was working at low speed when the foreman heard a strange sound, not a dull concrete crack, but a hollow echo. He ordered the equipment to stop and tried to tap the area with a crowbar. A cavity was found under the layer of old concrete. The workers carefully widened the hole and shone a flashlight inside. In the depths of the concrete chamber, the size of a small room, 2 dark objects could be seen, looking like large blocks of stone. When one of the workers went down below, it became clear that they were not stones. At the bottom were 2 human skeletons, pressed together in a sitting position, as if people were trying to hide from the cold. The bones were covered with a layer of dust and cement residue, but the shape of the bodies was so clearly preserved that even without an expert, one could understand that they had been placed there on purpose. One skeleton was holding the other by the shoulders, and this pose gave the impression of an embrace. Nearby, among the debris, was a piece of cloth, purple, almost unblemished, although everything else around it had lost its color. One of the workers whispered, "There are women's clothes here." Next to the fabric were the fragments of a metal clock. The hands stopped at 17:18. The work was stopped instantly. The site was blocked off and security was posted before the police arrived. Detectives from the King County Sheriff's Office were the first to arrive. On their orders, the area was closed to a radius of 50 yards. The river was blocked with a temporary dam to prevent debris from entering the water. The operation was classified as a probable crime scene. Forensic experts, criminalists, and representatives of the Department of Transportation arrived at the scene. The workers were in shock. Many refused to continue working. According to the foreman, a few men even crossed themselves. The picture was so eerie. It seemed that the bridge connecting the riverbanks had decided to reveal what it had been hiding all these years. For the next 3 days, the support was dismantled by hand. Each piece of concrete was labeled and taken to the laboratory. Inside the cavity, the experts found remnants of fabric, metal objects, and fragments of wood, possibly part of the old formwork that had not been removed after concreting. All the findings were carefully photographed. When the bodies were removed, it became clear that they had been there for many years. The bones contained remnants of clothing, denim fibers, jacket fragments, and metal fasteners. One skeleton belonged to a man, the other to a woman. A dilapidated metal plate with an engraving was found in the pocket of the man's pants, part of an identification badge from a watch. The analysis confirmed that it was a Timex Expedition, the model used by Mark Rangel. The police officially confirmed that the discovery was related to an old case. The news instantly spread through the media. Newspapers ran headlines. "The bridge has given away its secret. The missing couple was found in concrete." Journalists, local residents, and Mark's former colleagues gathered near the scene. For many, it came as a shock, not only because of the tragedy, but also because of the way the crime was concealed. Forensic experts began investigating. According to preliminary estimates, the bodies were placed in the pillar about a few weeks before the final concrete was poured, i.e., in late 2013 or early 2014. This meant one thing: they were killed before the official completion of the construction. When the concrete hardened, the cavity became an ideal hiding place where even the smell of decomposition could not penetrate. On the same day, police raided Morrison Construct's headquarters. On the order of Detective Michael Gray, old blueprints, shift logs, and employee passes were seized. Particular attention was paid to the night shifts of December 2013, when the final concreting was taking place. There were only 2 signatures in the log for that day, that of foreman Brian Shelton and company director Jack Morrison. At the same time, forensic experts confirmed it. The DNA of the remains matched the material taken from Anna's parents and Mark's sister. There was no doubt about it. After 8 years of waiting, the case was reopened. The official King County Police report concluded with the words, "The victims are Mark and Anna Rangel. The probable date of death is August 24, 2014. The preliminary cause is violent acts by third parties. The bodies were deliberately hidden during the concreting of the number 3 pillar of the bridge over the Snocklin River." The bridge remained closed to traffic. Its silence, once a symbol of engineering excellence, has now become a monument to a silent crime. And while the forensic scientists worked in the shadow of the pillars, it seemed that the concrete would keep not only the traces, but also the cold memory of what happened underneath for a long time to come. The autopsy began at the King County Medical Examiner's office on the 3rd day after the bodies were removed from the pylon. A team of 5 specialists worked on the case under the direction of Dr. Henry Lawrence, one of the most experienced forensic scientists in the state. For him, this was not just another case. He remembered the Rangers' name from the first reports of their disappearance in 2014. Now that the truth had finally emerged from the concrete, the expert's task was to find out exactly how these men had died. Tissue and bone samples were first cleaned of cement dust, and then a full osteological analysis was performed. Both skeletons were almost completely preserved, which was a rare occurrence after so many years in a confined environment. Forensic experts confirmed that the male remains belonged to Mark Rangel, and the female remains to his wife, Anna. This was also confirmed by DNA tests, which were compared with the materials of his parents and sister. A detailed examination of the bones showed that the couple had died a violent death. On Mark's chest, a round hole was found in the 3rd rib arch, characteristic of a gunshot wound. A deformed .45 caliber bullet was found inside the intercostal space. There was a second hole in Anna's skull and another bullet of the same caliber in its cavity. Both bullets were removed and sent for ballistic examination to the Federal Bureau of Investigation Laboratory in Seattle. After examination, the experts concluded that both shots were fired at close range, no more than 3 feet. Mark's wound was directed from the bottom up. He was probably standing or rising when the attacker pulled the trigger. Anna was shot in the left side of the back of the head, indicating a control shot after she had already fallen. Dr. Lawrence wrote in his report, "Both victims died instantly. There were no signs of a struggle or defensive wounds. This indicates that the attacker acted suddenly and purposefully. There were traces of grease and cement on the clothes. This meant that the bodies had been placed in the pillar shortly after death, when the concrete had not yet hardened. Experts assumed that the murder took place in the immediate vicinity of the construction site, possibly within the perimeter of the bridge. Then came the most difficult part, reconstructing the events. The forensic analysis revealed microscopic scratches on Mark's bones that could have been caused by the rope. This meant that he could have been tied up before the murder. There were no such marks on Anna's remains, but experts found drops of male blood on the fabric of her jacket. The theory seemed obvious. Mark was killed first, and then Anna was shot to death to get rid of the witness. The police immediately linked these findings to a long-standing conflict Mark had had while working as an inspector. Detective Michael Gray, who now headed the revamped investigation team, suggested that the motive for the murder could have been revenge or an attempt to silence internal corruption at the construction site. To confirm this, ballistics analysts compared the bullets to guns registered to former Morrison Construct employees. A week after the analysis began, the results came back. both bullets were fired from a Colt 1911 pistol of .45 caliber. This weapon was once registered to Jack Morrison, the owner of the company that managed the construction of the bridge. He bought it back in 2010 and kept it in his office. This coincidence was the first real breakthrough. The report stated, "The suspected weapon of the crime matches suspect Morrison's personal firearm. The chain of custody and the possibility of its use in 2014 should be checked." Additional investigations revealed that the pylon in which the bodies were found was poured at the time when the facility was officially announced as complete. This happened between December 2013 and January 2014, when the site was already closed to outsiders, and all work was carried out only by Morrison Construct employees. Thus, the bodies could only have been there with the knowledge of someone in the management. When the forensic results came back to the department, Detective Gray called a short press briefing. He spoke cautiously, without revealing details. "We have confirmed that the remains found are those of Mark and Anna Rangel. They died as a result of violent acts. The investigation is ongoing, and we already have a lead that will lead us to the perpetrators." For journalists, this sounded like a promise, but the detective announced the real conclusions only at a closed meeting. There, he put the ballistics results on the table and said the name that has now become the main one in the case, Jack Morrison. After the ballistics examination, there was little doubt. The bullets found in the bodies of Mark and Anna Rangel were fired from a Colt Model 1911 .45 caliber pistol, the same one that belonged to Jack Morrison, the owner of the Morrison Construct Construction Company. It was his company that reconstructed the bridge over the Snoqualmie River a few years ago. Now this bridge has become the scene of a crime hidden in concrete. Detective Michael Gray, who headed the investigation, knew from the beginning that this man was the key to everything. Morrison was an experienced builder, a man of influence with extensive connections in business circles. But behind the image of a successful contractor was a tough, even ruthless character. Colleagues described him as a man who did not tolerate resistance and did not forget insults. Investigators restored the chronology of events 8 years ago. In 2013, Morrison Construct won a government tender to reconstruct the Snoqualmie River Bridge, a project of strategic importance worth more than $20 million. The contract included strict oversight by the State Department of Transportation, and Mark Rangel, as an inspector, was responsible for quality control of the concrete and rebar. A few months after the construction began, Mark discovered a systematic violation: the use of cheaper materials that did not meet the technical standards. He reported this to his superiors and demanded independent tests. In memos taken from the department's archives, Mark wrote, "The pillars have cavities. The structure does not meet design standards. This is a direct threat to safety." His warnings caused a conflict. Morrison did not hide his irritation. Every delay meant fines and loss of profit. Witnesses recalled that the two had repeatedly argued on the construction site. One of the technicians interviewed by the police confessed, "Mark stood his ground, and Morrison shouted that he would ruin his career if he didn't stop sticking his nose in his own business." At the beginning of 2014, Mark officially reported the falsifications in the accounts. His report could have cost Morrison his entire business, including contract termination, millions of dollars in fines, and even criminal prosecution. A few weeks later, Mark and his wife disappeared while hiking in the mountains. When their bodies were found in the concrete, it all took on a different meaning. The motive became obvious. Morrison had both reason and opportunity. But the police needed direct evidence, testimony that could link him to the crime. The detectives decided to work through the suspect's entourage. The first person they noticed was the company's former foreman, Brian Shelton. He worked under Morrison during the reconstruction of the bridge, and in 2016, he was fired for discipline. After that, he changed jobs for several years, had debts, and eventually was left without a steady income. When the detectives came to him, he initially denied any connection to the case, but was nervous and constantly confused about the details. During the second interrogation, which lasted more than 6 hours, Shelton broke down. He admitted that Morrison had offered him to solve the problem with the inspector, who could have ruined the contract. According to him, Morrison planned to meet with Mark in person to work it out, and even suggested the same route, the Lake Ingalls Trail, where the couple was going in August. The meeting was supposed to be a discussion of technical issues outside of work. Shelton claimed that Morrison brought a gun with him in case the conversation got out of hand. When Mark arrived at the scene with his wife, the situation quickly escalated. According to Shelton, an argument began between the men. Mark accused the contractor of falsifying documents, and Morrison threatened that no one would believe the words of a petty inspector. The shots were fired suddenly, first one, then two. Morrison then forced Shelton to help him get rid of the bodies. They used a company truck to transport the bodies to a site near the bridge where they were preparing to pour concrete at night. Morrison ordered a small cavity to be created in the abutment, explaining that it was a temporary process chamber. The bodies were placed there, and the hole was filled with a mixture of illiquid concrete left over from the previous shift. Shelton did not receive the money he was promised and instead felt constant fear. When he was fired in 2016, he remained silent, afraid that Morrison would find a way to make him disappear. Only after the arrest of the contractor and new evidence did he agree to testify officially. His testimony was decisive. Everything matched: the time, the place, and the weapon. A document with Shelton's signature was found in the company's archives about the nighttime concrete work at the end of December 2013, just as the pylon was being poured. Jack Morrison's trial began in the spring of 2023 in the Washington State Supreme Court. Almost 9 years had passed since the Rangers disappeared, and now the truth that had been hidden for so long was being presented to the jury in the form of protocols, photos, and testimony. In the room were journalists, relatives, and former employees of Morrison Construct. Everyone knew that the verdict would be indicative. The case went far beyond a single crime. It became a symbol of corruption, cynicism, and human indifference. The prosecutor's office charged Morrison with premeditated double murder committed for profit. The evidence was overwhelming. During a search of the company's warehouse near Bellevue, a safe was found containing a Colt Model 1911 .45 caliber pistol. An examination showed that this was the gun that was used to shoot Mark and Anna. The barrel had unique grooves that matched those of the bullets recovered from the bodies. The handle showed traces of cement dust, the same as in the samples from the bridge. The prosecution presented the testimony of former workers who confirmed that in December 2012, a night pour took place without the presence of state inspectors. Only 2 signatures were recorded in the shift logs, Morrison's and foreman Brian Shelton's. This fact was the key. The defendant's behavior remained unchanged. Calm, distant, he hardly reacted to the prosecutor's words. His lawyer argued that the weapon could have been planted, and Shelton was forced to testify under pressure. But the logic of the events, financial documents, camera footage, and the chain of evidence destroyed any excuses. Brian Shelton testified on the 7th day of the trial. He was brought in under guard, wearing a gray prison jumpsuit. He spoke quietly but confidently. He told how Morrison asked him to help solve a problem with an inspector who could have disrupted the contract, how they met Mark and Anna on the trail where they were supposed to have a business conversation, how it all ended in 2 shots. Shelton described how they transported the bodies to the construction site and placed them in the unfilled cavity of the pillar. This testimony coincided with the forensic data and technical documents. His words were received without emotion in the hall. The Rangers' relatives sat in the front row, holding hands. They already knew the details, but hearing it out loud was harder than they expected. The prosecutor spoke briefly in his final speech. This is not a crime of passion. This is a cold decision by a man who put profit above human life. He killed 2 people and was sure he would get away with it. The jury went to deliberations. The room was silent, with only the rustle of pages and the occasional click of cameras. 5 hours later, they returned. The verdict was unanimous: guilty as charged. The court sentenced Jack Morrison to 2 life sentences without the possibility of parole. Brian Shelton, who cooperated with the investigation, was sentenced to 15 years in prison for aiding and abetting the crime. When the judge read the verdict, Morrison sat motionless, looking straight ahead, and did not say a word. After the hearing, his relatives did not comment. They left through a side exit, holding photos of Mark and Anna. On the stairs, Anna's mother told the journalists only one thing: "We have waited for justice, but justice is not peace." In June of that year, the Department of Transportation officially reopened the bridge. No memorial signs were installed there at the request of the family. They did not want the site of the tragedy to become a sensation. Once a year in August, they come there, lay flowers by the river, and stand silently for a few minutes. For the police, this is a closed case, an example of a successful investigation. For those who knew Mark and Anna, it's a story of how an ordinary trip turned into a long journey to the truth. They didn't get it back, but now they at least know where their path left off.